Welcome to Project 3. So, you should have just watched my shorter video on UV mapping and the basics of UV mapping a cube. Now it's time to do something a little more complex. I'm going to have you UV map a stool. It is going to be a model that has already been created. It is going to be available to you to download, and you're going to bring it into your project folder you're going to set up for this project. How are you going to do that? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to create your project folder by going to project window, and you're going to create it. As you can see, I've already created my project folder for this project, so I'm not going to repeat that. Now, you're going to have that project folder open. Let's see here, UV stool. And the model that you download from the Canvas page, you are just going to grab it. It is going to be called stool. In this case, I'm going to cut it out of here. Actually, let me just copy it. I'm going to copy this Maya file. I'm going to come to my project folder and I'm going to place it inside of my scenes. All right, so I just dropped that model inside the scene with the model inside of my project folder. So coming back here, I'm going to go to File, Set Project, and I'm going to set my project to my UV stool. There we go. That's been set. Now I'm going to go to File, Open Scene, and I can now open up the stool Maya folder that I placed inside of my scenes folder within my project folder. So that was just opening up a pre-existing scene inside of my project folder. Let me just enlarge this. Whoop, that's not what I wanted. We'll leave it like that. So if you don't understand what I did just set my project folder and opened up a scene that I placed inside of it. I do have a Canvas page on how to do that on Canvas. It should be in Module 3. You'll see it there. All right, so I have a scene with a little stool in it. Now, this, and I do have my wireframe shaded on. I'm going to turn that off. This is like a wooden bar stool. It's very organic in shape. You can see that it's not perfectly flat all the way around. It is going to have an organic shape like a wooden stool. It does have individual legs, individual footrests, and if I zoom in, you see that it has these little rivets as well. So each one of these objects that you see on my model needs to have a UV map in order to texture it. Which we are going to do. We are going to take this model, we are going to UV map it, and we're going to take it to Photoshop to create a texture there. So I am first going to select my entire model. I'm going to go up to Workspace. I'm going to go from General to UV Editing, and that's going to open up my UV editor. Yikes, that is a mess. You can see now that when you're UV mapping complex models, Maya cannot do it as clean and precise as it did it with the cube. Let's look at this. You can see that nice checkered texture is now completely warped and looks crazy. This is not going to work. We cannot properly UV map this. So what are we going to do? We're going to edit our UV map and we are going to make it as clean and precise as possible so we can take it to Photoshop. All right, first things first, let's just UV map the top part of the stool for now. So I am going to come up to my Isolate Select tool right here. And what that's going to do is it's just going to isolate this one and everything else is going to be hidden. Okay. So, that's a mess. Here is our current UV map. We don't want it to look like this, completely warped. We want it to look nice and checkered. You can see some parts of it look okay, but we want the entire stool top to look nice and precise. So first things first, Maya has a couple of options when it comes to creating a UV map. It's gonna be underneath create, and the ones we're gonna look at are gonna be these 3 and automatic. With automatic, that is Maya trying its best to do it okay, and that looks pretty clean. That's how Maya would try to, UV map this top part of the stool. And it actually did a pretty good job. Just the issue with UV mapping or automatic UV mapping in general is it's never this clean. It actually looks very, very bad, probably 80% of the time. So I'm not a big fan of using the automatic. It has its uses, especially when it's a simple object, but when it's a complex one, it's just not the best. So I'm actually going to undo this and I'm going to do this differently. So as you can see, this is not completely flattened. We want this to be a completely unwrapped object. And I'm not going to be able to do that to get the top part and the bottom part and the side part completely unwrapped without cutting it. Now, cutting it just helps us to guide where it's going to unwrap from. So you can see on this image right here, there are cuts, also called seams. There are seams that have been made around each face, and that's where it has unfolded. So back in Maya, we are going to create those seams ourselves by cutting the UV. So I'm going to go to object mode. This looks terrible, so I'm kind of excited to see how clean we can make this look. Now I'm going to make sure that we're in edge mode. So let's make sure that we right click, go to edge mode. I'm going to select this first edge right here and let's select this entire edge loop. So I'm going to hold shift, double click, and that entire edge loop is now selected. You can see it's going all the way around the stool. Looks good. This is where we are going to make our first cut. This is where we're going to have our very first seam. So I have 2 options. I can either go to the UV editor, go to cut and sew, and cut right here. And I just made that cut. Or I also have it in the UV toolkit to the right underneath the cut and sew tab, cut right here. So if I click away, you can see that the edge right here is thicker and now it's white. And that just means that's where I have made a cut, where I have made a seam. So let's put our first cut there and let's do the bottom part as well. Let's do it right on this edge. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to hold shift, double click, get that entire edge loop selected, and let's cut right there as well. Okay, so there's our next cut right there. So what did that do? Did I cut the entire model in those spots? No, I just cut the actual UV map projection in those spots. So if I go to object mode, and then in the UV editor, I go to UV shell, you can now see that those 3 parts of the UV projection are now separated from each other into 3 different UV maps. So that's how you cut to make the seams and to control where your seams are. So let's make the UV map of the rim of the bar top first. So I'm going to make sure that UV map is selected, and I'm going to turn off checker for now. And let's go up to create, and I'm going to use the cylindrical projector. So the cylindrical is for objects that are cylindrical in shape, which is really going to work for this one because it's really long and rectangular, and there is no rectangular option. There's just cylindrical, and that's going to work better than the planar or the spherical. The planar being good for flat planes, like the top part of the stool and the bottom part of the stool. And the spherical works best with spherical objects, as you can imagine. So in this case, let's do the cylindrical option. So I'm going to do cylindrical. There we go. I'm going to turn my checker map back on, and you can see these checkers don't look very good. They're really stretched out and flat, and I don't want that. I want these to be perfectly square. So I'm going to come here to my manipulator right here, and I'm just going to slide this all the way around and close it. You can tell right here, that's now closed. Now I'm going to do similarly to this one right here. I'm going to stretch this up, and you can see those checkers are becoming very square. So I want these to be as perfectly square as possible. That looks better. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to scale it down just a little bit further so that they're perfectly square right about there. You can see as I'm scaling my UV map, you're seeing the effect of it over in the viewport. And I think that's pretty square right there. Let's move this up to right about there. Now it's important to stay within this middle of the coordinates. If you go outside, it just complicates things because you're now using different coordinates, but you just want to stay in this middle square right here between 0 and 1, 0 and 1. There we go. So we've created a new UV map for this rim around the bar stool, and it's looking pretty good. You could see that when we made that UV map projection, Maya automatically cut a seam right down in this spot right here. You can see if I come to the UV editor and I do edge, there you go. There's that seam right there. Okay, so that UV shell looks pretty good. It's nice and flat, like so. Oops, and I'm good with that. So we just UV mapped the rim. Let's do the top and let's do the bottom. I'm going to make sure that I'm in UV shell mode. I'm going to select this top part right here. So instead of doing cylindrical, let's use planar, which planar is very good for flat surfaces, but we're not just going to click it. We are going to open up the options box. All right, so with the options box for planar, we need to make sure that we're projecting from the y-axis. So that means looking down on it along the y-axis. The x-axis would be looking at it from the side, and so would the z-axis, and we don't want that. We want this whole flat surface, so we're going to do y-axis looking down on it. Make sure that's toggled on, and let's do project. That looks nice. Take a look at that. So immediately that craziness that we were seeing has now flattened out, and we have some really good uniform checkers now. But we do want these checkers to be the same size as the ones around the rim. So let's scale that down. I'm going to come to the UV editor. I'm going to go to my scale tool and let's scale that down. Let's make sure that those are roughly the same size to right about there. And I'm going to now move this off to the side. Much better. We have some nice checkered UV maps for the top and the rim. Let's do the bottom now. Same thing as we did with the top. Let's go to create, planar, make sure that it's on the y-axis, and project. Looks good. All right, let's scale this one down to be roughly the same size as the top part. Make sure it's a little bit, there we go. So look at that. That is a much cleaner UV map set right there for the top, the bottom, and the rim. Okay, now let's make sure that all of these UV shells are facing the right way. We don't want any of the faces to be flipped, so I'm going to turn on the shaded UV shells right here. Okay, take a look at that. So blue means it's facing the correct way. The faces are facing the correct way. Red means that they've all been flipped over, and we don't want them to be flipped. this bottom portion to be flipped. So let's flip that. I'm going to select this UV shell. I'm going to come to the UV toolkit, and all the way down here where you see tools, we have the rotate, the scale, and the flip. Let's flip that. Okay, so now you can see it flipped that shell over. Now it is blue, meaning it is facing the right way. And I'm going to move this one back right here because it's okay to stack them. Because in this case, I don't really care if the pattern or the texture on the top is identical to the texture on the bottom. You're not really going to see the bottom, so we don't have to worry too much about that. Stacking them works for me. All right, awesome. So we just UV mapped the top part of the stool by breaking it into a UV set of 3 different pieces, and we moved them aside. Now, let's take a look at the legs, the footrests, and the rivets.